Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our distinguished author, Congresswoman Lee, for bringing forth this legislation. Madam Speaker, for the past 20 years, the 2002 authorization has been used to wage war and cause destruction around the world. While many in this Congress have participated in war, I'm someone who has endured war and understand the impact it has on innocent lives. The act of war does nothing to make us safe. Engaging in endless wars has led us to undermining our most important morals, peace, liberty, and justice. Congress cannot sit idly by as we take more civilian lives, decrease our ability to build prosperity at home. The more we spend on endless wars, the less we are able to invest in our own people with education, housing, and employment opportunities. I am pleased that Congress is finally working on restoring its authorization over matters of peace and war. I yield back. Thank you.
We have been we've seen an uptick in questions and inquiries in regards to how we're fighting for immigrant protections, especially as deportations have continued in recent weeks. I know the last few weeks have been really challenging for many immigrants after 4 years of Trump. Many of us were hoping that January 21st would bring a swift change. We have seen some major changes, the repeal of the Muslim ban, the Remain in Mexico policy, as well as many of the other executive orders. The Biden administration also released an immigration proposal that has some truly exciting provisions, most notably the pathway to citizenship for 11 million undocumented people. But while we've seen some incredible changes, we've also seen some parts of our system stay remarkably the same. I've spoken out against the new detention facility for children, as well as against the increased number of deportations. We need a real fundamental change to our immigration laws, including how we enforce them. The answer isn't more humane jails for children. There is really no such thing. The answer is to end the mass detentions of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. In the coming weeks, we'll be working closely with my colleagues on immigration reform that recognizes our common humanity and hopefully force this administration to really fulfill the promise that they made in regards to having a just, humane immigration policy.
For 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I apologize, Mr. Secretary, if I'd missed if this question was asked of you. I know we've been talking about Iran quite a lot. It seems like there's a kind of a stalemate with Iran negotiations, as both sides have been waiting for the other side to make the first move. It is a plain fact that we're the ones who left the deal. Why shouldn't we be the one that make the first move to rejoin?
Thank you. A couple of things on that. First, as you noted, we've been very clear that the path to diplomacy is open, and we're fully prepared to engage on it. And the President said repeatedly that if Iran comes back into compliance, we will too, and then we will try to work on the other issues that divide us, including lengthening and strengthening the agreement and dealing with these other issues that we just discussed.
I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary. If we are not re-entering the deal, how do we expect them? be in compliance? Shouldn't that happen first before we ask them to be in compliance?
The challenge is you just can't re-enter the deal by flipping a switch. We pulled out of the deal 3 years ago. The Iranians have unfortunately moved further and further away from their own compliance, and so there are and there would be challenging issues to work through that require actually talking about it that are necessary. That's why when the European Union invited all of the parties, or in our case, former parties to the deal, to start having that conversation, we immediately said yes. The Iranians have said no, and really the ball is in their court to see if they're interested in pursuing diplomacy. We are.
Appreciate that. Why haven't you lifted the sanctions that the Trump administration placed on the ICC staff, including the prosecutor Fatou Bensouda?
We're currently reviewing those sanctions. We want to make the best determination we can about the best way forward in terms of engaging the ICC. We discussed a little earlier our deep concerns about some of the ICC's efforts to exert jurisdiction in areas where we believe they don't or should not have it. But it would also be good to have a productive relationship with the ICC, and it's something that we're reviewing.
So are you saying there is legitimacy to the sanctions that were placed under Trump on the ICC?
No, all I'm saying is that it's something that's under review, and at the same time, we have real concerns about some of the assertions of jurisdiction with which we disagree. But we share certainly a common view that there needs to be accountability.
I do appreciate that, Secretary. I would like to get a clear answer on why the sanctions aren't removed. I mean, having concerns don't actually respond to why the sanctions aren't removed at the moment.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
No, just to finish up, I'd be pleased to talk to you once we complete our review and work through what we've agreed to.
The gentlelady.
Look forward to that full morning in Bemidji, having a conversation with our tribal leaders from the Red Lake and White Lake reservations. It's been a really revealing and heartbreaking conversation. We learned the ways in which treaty rights have been disregarded. We learn the ways in which intimidations and exploitation has taken place. We learned the ways in which the Line 3 pipeline will disrupt the livelihood and the future of the tribal communities that it will impact. Yesterday, we had lots of conversations about what this pipeline will do to not only the Native communities of Minnesota, but to the rest of us who live on the Mississippi, whether you are in Minnesota or downstream. It is unconscionable for us to see zero action being taken by our governor and president in stopping this pipeline. We know that this pipeline is going to impact 1,000 acres of water. It will touch 211 bodies of water. The kind of catastrophe that awaits us is avoidable. It is easy, I think, oftentimes for government to come back and apologize and find ways to do right by communities it harms. But it's more challenging for government to do the right thing in listening to these communities when they tell them the possibility of something going wrong and prevent that from happening in the first place. None of our communities who have been engaged in this battle want to come back and say, I told you so, after the spills take place and our water is polluted and the number of people who get cancer and get sick from it increases. A lot of people have said time has run out, that this pipeline is 90% finished. But the resilient water protectors and the native tribes that have welcomed us into their spaces tell us time never runs out on fighting for what is right. They tell us about the generational fight that they have engaged with the US government to understand that treaties are the supreme law of the land and that their sovereignty needs to be protected. And that for many of us, we say water is life, but for them, that is a spiritual belief. They are of the water, and they live on this land because of the water. And so I feel obligated to honor their life and sacrifice. And I also feel honored to be joined by colleagues who understand that not only is water life, but that native sovereignty is important, and that we, as elected officials, have a constitutional obligation to protect treaty rights. And so I want to welcome some of my colleagues who have traveled from across the country to be in community with our siblings. I will start with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts.
Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Global Human Rights for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I know it is harder to end a war than start one in this town. So I thank you and the President for ending our longest war. Over the weekend, both the New York Times and Washington Post reported that August 29th drone strike that supposedly prevented a car bomb attack at the airport in Kabul instead killed Samari Ahmadi, an aid worker, and his family. The strike happened when there was a lot of eyes on Kabul, but it's not unusual for US drone strikes to kill civilians. It is not unusual for the US government to claim it killed terrorists instead. And this is coming on the heels of reporting that DOD failed to spend a single dollar of the redress payments that Congress has provided for civilian casualties. As Congress considers the continuing utility of the 2001 AUMF, how can you possibly ensure us that our drone strikes and over-the-horizon capabilities will actually reach their targets?
First, when it comes to moving forward, I hope that we can, again, take this up in a different setting and different session. I know with regard to the drone strike that you're referring to, that is being looked at very, very, very carefully by by others in the administration so that we understand exactly what happened or what didn't happen. And no country on earth, no government takes more effort, takes more precautions to try to ensure that anyone other than the intended terrorist target is struck using a drone or by any other means. But certainly we know that in the past, civilians have been hurt and have been killed in these strikes. And we have to make sure that we have in place every possible measure to allow us to continue to use the tool to defend and protect ourselves while avoiding anyone on the civilian side from being hit. And we also need to look, as you rightly said, at the authorizations going back to 2001 and 2002. We strongly support that. Those need to be updated to reflect present realities, not the reality as it was in 2001 or 2002.
And Mr. Secretary, from the State Department's point of view, what is the impact of the uncountable and accountable civilian harm on our counterterrorism goals?
It certainly runs counter to those goals. Whenever there are civilian casualties, whenever there are unintended injuries or deaths, it does not advance what we're trying to do. And so that's besides the moral obligation we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that civilians are not harmed or killed. It's also true that in terms of the mission itself, we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because if people lose faith and confidence in it, if they, and particularly in the countries in question, if people see it as a tool to do harm to innocent civilians as opposed to terrorists who are a threat to everyone, that will undermine support for what we're doing.
And in your role and previous roles in other administrations, how much of an analysis is being done to look at whether our counterterrorism efforts are actually being counter to the work that we are trying to do in ending terrorism around the world?
I would call it very, very significant. Certainly in the Obama administration, we spent a tremendous amount of time looking at, reviewing, and modifying all of these procedures, all of the safeguards, all of the criteria that went along with using these tools. And we've been in the midst of conducting just such a review in this administration to make sure, to the best of our ability, that when we take a strike, we get the intended person and no one else.
Gentlelady's time has expired.